Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Think Like a Freak by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner.
Yes.
And specifically, we're going to be focusing on a concept that they introduced called separating equilibriums.
That's right.
Now, this is something that you all wanted to hear more about, and it's all about essentially getting people to reveal their true intentions.
Yeah,
So, we're going to be exploring some really wild examples today.
definitely.
From medieval ordeals to Van Halen's concert writer.
It's going to be a fun one.
It is. It is. So to kick things off, maybe you gave us a quick overview of what separating equilibriums actually means.
Sure. So separating equilibriums is really about designing scenarios
Right.
where people's choices reveal what they truly desire or believe, often without even realizing it.
Okay.
It's almost like setting up these little behavioral experiments in real life.
Interesting. So you're saying that we can actually use these scenarios to kind of trick people into showing their true colors.
In a way, yes. By carefully structuring the situation, we can create incentives that encourage people to act in a way that reveals their underlying motivations.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. So let's jump into our first example, which sounds like something straight out of Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Medieval trials by ordeal.
Ah, yes.
Now, for those who aren't familiar with this bit of history, these trials involve people having to do these crazy things like holding hot iron or plunging their arm into boiling water to prove their innocence.
Right.
How on earth does that connect to separating equilibriums?
Well, it might seem barbaric and completely random at first glance, but economist Peter Leeson has this fascinating theory
Right.
that these ordeals weren't just about blind faith.
Really?
He suggests that priests were actually manipulating them behind the scenes.
Wait, so you're telling me they were rigging the trials?
Essentially, yes. The theory is that the priests would ensure that the innocent were protected. So
Oh,
maybe they'd swap out the boiling water for something cooler, or make sure the hot iron wasn't actually scorching.
wow. So it was all smoke and mirrors.
In a sense, yes, but there was a method to their madness.
Okay, I'm listening.
The guilty, on the other hand, would believe they were facing real danger.
Right.
And fearing divine retribution, they'd often confess rather than go through with the ordeal.
So it was all about creating a situation where only the truly innocent would be willing to take the risk.
Exactly. The design of the ordeal itself became a way to incentivize people to reveal their guilt or innocence.
That's amazing. It kind of makes sense in a twisted way.
It does. It highlights how even in these seemingly archaic practices, there was a sort of underlying logic at play.
Right. It makes you wonder about the reliability of things like modern lie detector tests.
Interesting point.
I mean, are they susceptible to similar manipulations? Could someone knowing how they work potentially game the system?
It's definitely a possibility. The idea of separating equilibriums really emphasizes how even seemingly objective measures can be influenced by people's perceptions and motivations.
That's a bit unsettling, but also really thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more modern and a lot more rock and roll.
Let's do it.
Van Halen's infamous "No Brown M&Ms" clause in their concert writer.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Was that just a case of rockstar diva behavior, or is there something more to the story?
Oh, there's definitely more to it. What seems like an outrageous demand was actually a brilliant tactic to ensure that concert venues were paying attention to safety details.
Okay.
Their writer was packed with technical specifications for setting up the stage and the sound system.
Right.
And they knew that if a venue overlooked the brown M&Ms, they were probably overlooking other crucial instructions as well.
So it was like a canary in a coal mine, but with candy.
Exactly. A simple, seemingly irrational request served as a test
Right.
to reveal whether the venue was truly committed to following their instructions to the letter.
That's so clever.
Hmm.
And speaking of clever tricks to reveal true intentions, the book also talks about Zappos, the online shoe retailer.
Yes,
They offer new employees $2,000 to quit during their training period.
they do.
Why would you do that?
Well, it seems counterintuitive, but it's all about self-selection. By offering that tempting quitting bonus, they weed out the people who aren't truly passionate about the company's culture and values.
Interesting. So the people who stay are more likely to be genuinely invested in their work.
That's the idea. It's a way of ensuring that everyone on board is truly aligned with the company's mission.
It's like they're saying, if you're just here for the paycheck, here's an easy way out.
Right.
But if you believe in what we're doing, then let's build something great together.
Exactly. It's a bold move, for sure. but it seems to be working for them.
It's fascinating how this concept of separating equilibriums can be applied in so many different ways.
It really is. It's a versatile tool for understanding human behavior.
Okay. Now, I'm curious about how this applies to dealing with something a little less savory, like scammers.
Oh, like those Nigerian prince emails.
Exactly. The ones that promise you millions of dollars if you just help them transfer funds out of Nigeria.
Right.
How can separating equilibriums help us outsmart those guys?
Well, think about how these scams operate. They cast a wide net. They know that most people won't fall for it,
Yeah.
but they only need a tiny percentage to bite to make it profitable.
So they're dealing with a ton of false positives.
Exactly. People who aren't actually gullible enough to fall for the scam.
Right. But how do we use that against them?
Well, one economist, Brian Hurley, came up with this interesting idea of using chatbots.
Chatbots.
Yes, to basically waste the scammers' time and resources.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine a chatbot that engages with the scammer, pretending to be interested, asking questions, dragging out the process as long as possible.
So it's like creating this digital decoy that keeps them occupied and prevents them from targeting real victims.
Precisely. It's like turning their own game against them.
That's brilliant. I love it. So we've talked about medieval ordeals, rock and roll riders, and even outsmarting scammers.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But all of these examples really highlight how thinking like a freak can challenge our traditional assumptions.
Definitely.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, let's talk about something that often gets a bad rap: quitting. Is Winston Churchill's famous "never give up" advice always the best approach?
That's a good question.
The book seems to challenge that idea, doesn't it?
It does. There's this concept called the sunk cost fallacy,
Okay.
where we become so attached to the time, effort, and resources we've already invested in something
Right.
that we ignore the potential benefits of moving on, even when things clearly aren't working out.
So we're basically throwing good money after bad because we're too stubborn to admit defeat.
Pretty much. We let our past investments cloud our judgment about the future.
I can see how that would apply to things like business ventures or even personal projects.
Absolutely.
But what about bigger life decisions?
Well, the authors actually created a website called Freakonomics Experiments,
Yeah.
where people could let a coin toss decide whether to quit a job, a relationship, or other major commitments.
Wait, you're telling me people actually let chance decide their fate?
They did.
Yeah.
And the results were surprisingly positive. In many cases, those who quit based on the coin toss reported increased happiness and well-being down the line. Wow, really?
Especially in relationships and jobs they weren't satisfied with? It suggests that sometimes we cling to things out of inertia or fear,
Yeah.
even when letting go might be the best thing for us.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It makes you wonder how many of us are stuck in situations that aren't truly serving us just because we're terrified to quit.
It's a common problem.
Mm-hmm.
We're often conditioned to believe that quitting is a sign of weakness,
Right.
when in reality it can be a sign of strength and self-awareness.
I love that reframing of quitting. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
And I'm already feeling my mind expanding with all these freakish insights.
That's great to hear.
But for now, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll delve into the author's personal stories about quitting and explore even more mind-bending ideas from Think Like a Freak.
Sounds good.
Still with us?
We'll be right back. So before the break, we were talking about quitting.
Yes, we were.
And I mentioned that the authors have some pretty interesting personal stories about quitting.
One of them actually gave up on a lifelong dream of becoming a professional golfer.
Really? Wow. I find that kind of surprising,
Yeah.
especially considering their emphasis on challenging conventional wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like giving up on a dream would go against that philosophy.
It might seem that way on the surface, but the key takeaway here is understanding the why behind the decision to quit.
Okay.
In this case, the author realized that while he loved playing golf, he simply didn't have the natural talent to make it as a pro.
I see.
Continuing on that path would have meant sacrificing other opportunities
Right.
and probably setting himself up for a lot of disappointment.
So it's about recognizing your limitations.
In a way, yes. But it's also about making a conscious choice to focus your energy on areas where you can truly excel.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So instead of chasing a dream that's not realistic, he chose to pursue paths where he could actually thrive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing your strengths and playing to them.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
What about the other author? What's his quitting story?
Well, he actually walked away from a successful career in economics.
He quit a stable, well-paying job.
He did.
Wow. That's a bold move. What was the reason behind that?
Simply put, He found the work incredibly boring.
Oh.
He was good at it, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it wasn't fulfilling him intellectually or creatively.
So he was basically going through the motions.
Yeah, kind of. He realized that true success isn't just about external achievements like money or status.
Right.
It's about finding work that aligns with your passions and values.
That's such an important message. It's easy to get caught up in chasing traditional markers of success.
Definitely.
Money, status, prestige.
Mm-hmm.
But we often forget to ask ourselves if those things actually make us happy.
Absolutely. These stories really highlight the importance of regularly assessing your goals and commitments.
Right.
And asking yourself, are they still serving me? Are they bringing me closer to the life I want to live?
Yeah. And if the answer is no, then maybe it's time to consider a change.
Exactly. It's about being honest with yourself and making choices that align with your true values.
It's like that Marie Kondo philosophy for your career and life choices.
Uh-huh. I like that.
If it doesn't spark joy, maybe it's time to let it go.
Exactly. But of course, it's often easier said than done.
Right.
Quitting can be scary, especially when you're facing pressure from family, society, or even your own inner critic.
Oh, absolutely. There's this societal stigma around quitting.
Yeah.
It's seen as a sign of weakness or failure.
Right. But the authors argue that quitting can actually be a strategic move,
Okay.
one that opens up new and potentially better opportunities.
So how do we overcome that fear of quitting?
Wow.
How do we make decisions that are truly in our best interests, even when they go against the grain?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the authors offer some valuable insights on that.
Okay.
They emphasize the importance of distinguishing between sunk costs and opportunity costs.
I'm not sure I fully understand those concepts. Can you elaborate a bit?
Sure. So sunk costs are basically those things you've already invested. Okay.
Time, money, effort, things you can't get back.
Right.
And it's easy to get fixated on those sunk costs and let them dictate our decisions,
Right.
even when it's no longer rational to do so.
So like staying in a dead-end job just because you've been there for 5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I see that.
But the authors argue that we should focus more on opportunity costs,
Okay.
which are basically the potential benefits we miss out on by staying the course.
Interesting.
They ask, what could you be doing with your time and energy if you weren't clinging to this failing endeavor?
So it's about weighing the cost of staying stuck versus the potential rewards of moving on.
Precisely. It's a shift in perspective
Right.
that can be incredibly empowering.
I like that. But even when we know we should quit, it's still hard to actually take that leap.
It is. It can be really tough.
Are there any practical strategies for making that leap, for actually pulling the trigger?
Well, one technique the author suggests is called a pre-mortem.
A pre-mortem. That sounds a bit morbid. Yeah, it's not as scary as it sounds.
Yeah.
It's basically a thought experiment
Okay.
where you imagine that the project or decision has already failed,
Okay.
and then you work backwards to identify the potential causes of that failure.
So it's like a preemptive autopsy for your project?
Exactly.
Okay.
You're trying to anticipate potential problems before they even arise.
I see. So by identifying those potential pitfalls in advance, you can either address them proactively,
Right.
or if the risks are just too high, you can make a more informed decision about whether to continue at all.
Precisely. It helps you approach the decision more objectively.
That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
It takes the emotion out of the equation and allows for a more rational assessment.
That's the goal. But sometimes, even with all the right decision-making tools, we still need to convince others to see our point of view.
That's true, especially when those people have strong opposing opinions.
Absolutely.
So how do we approach those situations without getting into arguments or becoming defensive?
Well, the authors offer some great advice on the art of persuasion. They argue that understanding your audience is crucial.
Okay.
Don't assume that people's opinions are based solely on logic or facts.
Right.
They're often deeply intertwined with emotions, personal experiences, and deeply held beliefs.
So trying to win an argument with facts and logic alone might not be the most effective approach.
Exactly. Instead, try to understand why people believe what they believe.
Okay. So it's about empathy,
Yeah.
putting yourself in their shoes and trying to see the world from their perspective.
Exactly. It's about finding common ground and building a connection rather than trying to force them to see things your way.
That makes sense.
Okay.
But how do we actually bridge that gap, especially when we're dealing with complex or controversial issues?
Well, the authors highlight the power of stories and persuasion.
Stories.
Yes. A well-told story can connect with people on an emotional level
Okay.
and make them more receptive to your message.
It's like that old saying, facts tell, but stories sell.
Exactly.
But what makes a story effective in persuasion?
Well, the authors suggest that it goes beyond just a personal anecdote. Okay.
It uses data and evidence to provide context and scale.
Right.
But it weaves those facts into a compelling narrative
Yeah.
that resonates with the listener's emotions and experiences.
So it's a blend of storytelling and data presented in a way that engages both the head and the heart.
Precisely. It's about painting a vivid picture
Okay.
that captures people's imaginations and makes them feel something rather than just bombarding them with information.
This reminds me of the whole narrative around the obesity epidemic.
Oh, yes.
You know, the idea that it's simply a result of people eating too much and being lazy.
Right, the oversimplified story.
Yeah. But the authors challenge that simplistic view, don't they?
They do. They point out that when people cut back on fat,
Mm.
they often replaced it with sugar and carbohydrates, which can actually contribute to weight gain.
Right. So it's not just about calories in, calories out.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced than that.
This highlights how a seemingly intuitive story can be misleading if it's not backed up by a deeper understanding of the data. Absolutely. It's a reminder to always question those easy answers
Right.
and dig a little deeper to uncover the real story.
And that brings us back to that core principle of thinking like a freak.
Yes.
Challenging assumptions, questioning conventional wisdom, and embracing a more data-driven and creative approach to problem solving.
Exactly. It's about being willing to think differently.
This whole discussion has been incredibly eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'm starting to see how powerful it can be to question those deeply ingrained beliefs and approach problems from a fresh perspective.
It's a journey of continuous learning and unlearning.
Right.
And sometimes the most unexpected solutions emerge when we're willing to let go of those old ways of thinking.
And embrace our inner freak.
Exactly.
Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Think Like a Freak.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. This book has really challenged my thinking in so many ways.
That's the goal, to get you thinking differently.
It definitely has.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one overarching takeaway, it would be the power of questioning everything. You know, not just accepting things at face value, but really digging deeper and challenging those assumptions.
I think that's a great takeaway. The authors have this great phrase, think like a child.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Kids haven't yet been fully indoctrinated into the way things should be,
Right.
so they're more likely to ask those why questions that can lead to really innovative solutions.
It's like they're not afraid to be wrong or challenge the status quo.
Exactly.
And sometimes those seemingly naive questions can actually expose flaws in our logic or reveal opportunities that we might have otherwise missed.
It's all about approaching things with fresh eyes.
Right. And it's not just about questioning external assumptions.
Sure.
It's also about examining our own beliefs and biases.
Absolutely.
You know, what stories are we telling ourselves that might be limiting our potential or preventing us from seeing things clearly?
It's easy to get stuck in our own echo chambers, surrounded by people who just reinforce our existing beliefs.
Yeah. It's comfortable, but it's not always productive.
Exactly. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from stepping outside of our comfort zones.
And seeking out perspectives that challenge our own.
The authors call this constructive disagreement.
Okay.
It's not about arguing for the sake of being right,
Right.
but rather seeking out diverse viewpoints and engaging in thoughtful debate as a way to refine our understanding of the world.
So it's about having the humility to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and that we can learn something valuable from people who see things differently than we do.
Exactly. It's about being open to new ideas and perspectives.
And sometimes that process of constructive disagreement might lead us to realize that we need to change our minds.
And that can be tough.
Yeah. But it's also incredibly liberating.
It is.
It all comes back to that idea of not being afraid to quit.
Yes.
Whether it's a bad habit, a toxic relationship, or even a deeply held belief that's no longer serving us.
The authors argue that quitting can actually be a sign of intelligence and strength.
Okay.
It shows that you're not attached to sunk costs.
Right.
And that you're willing to let go of something that's not working to make space for something better.
So how do we know when it's the right time to quit?
There's no magic formula,
Right.
but the authors suggest weighing the sunk costs.
Those things we've already invested.
Against the opportunity costs.
The potential benefits we might gain by pursuing something else.
Exactly. If the opportunity costs outweigh the sunk costs, it might be time to reconsider our commitment.
So it's about making a conscious decision based on a clear assessment of the situation.
Yes.
rather than letting fear or inertia hold us back.
It's about taking control of your own life and making choices that align with your values.
And remembering that quitting doesn't have to equal failure.
Absolutely. It can be a strategic move that allows us to redirect our energy and resources towards something more fulfilling.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to let go of the shore to discover new oceans.
I love that analogy, and I
Yeah.
think it's a perfect note to end on.
Me too. So as you go out into the world, dear listeners, remember to embrace that spirit of curiosity and open-mindedness.
Don't be afraid to question everything. Challenge those assumptions, and yes, even quit those things that are no longer serving you.
You might just discover that letting go is the key to unlocking a whole new world of possibilities.
Well said.
I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Think Like a Freak as much as we did.
Me too! It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise, until next time, keep those minds curious and remember to think a little differently.
See you next time.